Today's case may be a bit of a controversial one, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's a long one, so get ready. We can all agree that a person's home should be the place where they feel the most safe and the most secure. The right to bear arms is a very sensitive topic, but most people would agree that everyone has the basic right to protect their home. On Elm Street, in the city of Little Falls, Minnesota, after a retired man had been burglarized nearly a dozen times, he started to feel more and more violated and afraid in his own home. So with little help from law enforcement and at his wits' end, he decided to take matters into his own hands by securing his home the best that he could. He armed himself in his home and waited for the next inevitable break-in. But this time, he would be ready. In this story, we will discuss this truly tragic and personally, I think, avoidable situation and how two teens' bad choices resulted in a real-life nightmare on Elm Street. Like I said, it's a controversial one, and you're gonna be with me for a while. Hey guys, I'm Elise. This is 10 to Life. Hear me when I say, buckle up and get ready. You're gonna be with me for a while, and let's dive right in. Byron David Smith was born on June 11, 1948 in Little Falls, Minnesota. He was born to parents Ted and Ida Smith. Byron and his older brother grew up in a happy household, and they participated in the Boy Scouts from a very young age. Byron would go on to become an Eagle Scout, which is the highest rank in the Scout system, an honor that only 4% of Boy Scouts ever receive. He became an avid outdoorsman and always wanted to make his parents proud. He worked hard to live up to his father's achievements, who was a decorated Army veteran serving in World War II as a pilot. During a raid in Germany, his plane was shot down, and he became a prison officer of war for 19 months. After his release, he was given a Rolex watch by the French government for his service and time spent as a prisoner of war, which he would later pass on to his son Byron. Byron cherished this watch, which was to him a just priceless heirloom that signified his father's bravery and sacrifice. Byron graduated Little Falls High School second in his class for academics, and after college, he was inducted into the U.S. Air Force as an electrical engineer. Due to his impressive test scores and engineering ability, he was quickly assigned one of the most difficult and critical jobs during the War of Vietnam, implementing bombing and navigation systems on B-52 bomber airplanes. He then volunteered for highly dangerous in-flight duty on the B-52s, which earned him a Commendation Medal for excellent performance on these flights. He was awarded the Air Combat Medal and promoted to E-5 Staff Sergeant in less than 4 years, which was an accomplishment less than 5% of all first-term enlistees met. He received the Air Force Personal Commendation Medal, the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award for Distinction in Hazardous Conditions, the Air Force Good Conduct Medal, the National Defense Service Medal for voluntary service during a national emergency, the Vietnam Service Award for direct support of ground troops, the Air Force Longevity Award Ribbon for 4 years or more of service, the Vietnam Gallantry Cross Medal from the Vietnamese government for valor or heroism, and the Vietnam Campaign Medal for direct combat support. It's obvious. He served an incredibly important and brave role for the U.S. and continued to do so even after his time in the military. After his service, Byron went back to school and attended California Polytech University, where he studied electrical engineering and was hired to develop wideband television distribution systems. After that, he became employed by the United States Department of State as a technical security engineer, where he would develop and implement security systems for foreign U.S. embassies around the world. He had 50 staff members who worked directly under him and had extensive responsibilities to protect the embassies from threats of terrorism. Byron was able to travel the world with this career and lived in places like Bangkok, Cairo, South Africa, Moscow, and Beijing. His father, Ted, unfortunately, passed away in 1998. And after 20 years working at the State Department, in 2009, he retired to his home in Little Falls, Minnesota. He retired there to live with his mother, Ida, in his childhood home. Byron was always so dedicated to his work. He never settled down and got married or had any children. So when his mother, Ida, passed away 4 years after his retirement, he was left with a lot of free time. The home he shared with his mother was on a beautiful, sprawling 16-acre piece of land with the Mississippi River directly in the back. After he inherited the home, he enjoyed doing renovation projects and various yard projects on this property. Byron was said to be a very private person, and he developed several hobbies that he could do alone, such as hunting, hiking, and outdoor photography. One of his most prized possessions was a $6,000 professional Nikon D800 camera, which he used to photograph the wildlife and scenery of Minnesota. Another one of his hobbies was collecting rare antique items, and he would often go out of town to antique shops hoping to add to his unique collection that he had gathered. Even though Byron enjoyed his privacy, he also was well liked in the community and good friends with several of his neighbors, primarily a married couple named John and Kathy Lang and another neighbor named Bill Anderson. After Byron retired and started spending more time at home, they came to know him as an interesting conversationalist who had amazing stories from his travels around the world and about his time in the military. He would go to dinner every Friday night with John and Kathy, and he even allowed their son's band to play in a garage on his 16-acre property. Since they had nowhere else to practice, he offered his space up to them. Byron was very passionate, too, about mentoring the youth of Little Falls, and he became very involved with the local Boy Scouts, tutoring science and math, and working as a judge for science fairs. Byron enjoyed his peaceful life and did his best to give back to the community and assist others whenever he could. Just a gentle man in this community who didn't have a family of his own, wanted to pay it forward, offer his expertise and knowledge, and really just involve himself and help out wherever he could. In 2011, Byron came across a group of boys who looked like they could use some of that guidance, and he offered to pay them to do various odd jobs, mostly yard work on his property during the summer while they were out of school. He paid them very well, and after showing them what needed to be done, he'd usually leave them to do it without micromanaging them. Byron would be off on the property working on something else somewhere else while the boys would either be chopping wood, mow the lawn, moved various things on the property around for him, did some painting, etc. He'd even cook for the boys on occasion, and they seemed to appreciate the work that he was giving them and all of the interesting stories he had to tell about his life. However, over the course of the summer, Byron started to notice that small things were either misplaced or missing. And at first, he chalked it up to him just not remembering what he had done with the items. However, this wasn't really too likely because Byron spent years in his career paying attention to very small details, and he was the type of person who itemized everything he owned, keeping every receipt, every pamphlet, and warranty organized and accounted for. Slowly, the number of things that were missing and things moved around in his home started to concern him, and some of his expensive lawn equipment even started to get damaged. It seemed like the boys were beginning to take advantage of Byron's trust and generosity, and he decided that since summer was almost over, he just wouldn't have them back next year to work. Between 2011 and 2012, there seemed to be a huge uptick in crime around the once quiet and safe town of Little Falls, Minnesota. People who lived there said that there started to become a serious substance use problem as well. With little to do in the town besides outdoor activities, teens with too much time on their hands seemed to get themselves into trouble by partying, vandalizing, and committing small petty crimes. However, one Little Falls teenager, Brady, usually kept himself busy working for his dad's tree trimming business and doing yard work in the summer. Nicholas was born on March 21st, 1995, to parents Jason and Kimberly Brady. Jason and Kimberly were a little rough around the edges and had their fair share of run-ins with the law for substance possession and other minor crimes. Jason was in and out of jail quite a bit, and Nick and his two older sisters would spend a lot of time with their grandparents, who had a more stable household to provide for them. Nick's grandparents always made sure to take the kids to church and tried to keep the kids in extracurricular activities to avoid them getting caught up in some trouble. Nick participated in wrestling and also basketball at Pillager High School. And he loved the outdoors for hunting and for four-wheeling. He was said to just be very goofy, funny, and just an outgoing kid who was one of the popular kids at his school. He was a goofy and free spirit, but some other students who attended the same school said that sometimes he'd act like a little punk, especially towards kids who weren't necessarily considered a part of the cool crowd or the in crowd. Kind of a little bully-like behavior. Nick was very close to his sister Rachel and one of their cousins, 18-year-old Haile Kifer. The three of them were said to be peas in a pod and spent so much time together ever since they were babies. Haile was born on October 17, 1994. She was born to parents Jay and Jenny Kifer. She had a very protective older brother named Dylan, and they were known to be a very tight-knit family. Haile was said to be very pretty, popular, smart, and athletic, just like her cousin Nick. She attended Little Falls High School and was on the gymnastics team, the softball team, and participated in diving and cross country. She always maintained a job, at times working at both a local KFC and a Pizza Ranch restaurant, and even the local movie theater. Constantly busy with activities, with jobs, just really keeping busy, you would think, and keeping out of trouble. Some of the Kifer and Brady's favorite memories were holidays spent with the family and cousins at their grandparents' house on days like Christmas and Thanksgiving. Their grandparents were also foster parents, and at times they were concerned that a few of the teens in and out of their home might have been negatively influencing their grandkids. Some of these foster teens obviously came from a rougher background, but they hoped that the values that they instilled into their grandchildren would help them make good choices, regardless of what the other kids may have been doing or bringing into the home as far as learned behavior or learned habits. Well, in the summer of 2011, Nicholas had started hanging out with some boys named Jesse and Cody. He met them through school, and they wouldn't have been considered necessarily good influences. For whatever reason, maybe boredom or just wanting a thrill, the group, including his cousin Haile and sister Rachel, started vandalizing and spray painting public property, like in the park and even traffic signs. They were also getting heavily into partying at night, experimenting with alcohol and various types of substances. One man took notice of them and thought he could help these kids get back on track by offering them to work on his land. Sound familiar? Byron Smith decided to ask the boys if they would like to come and do those odd jobs and yard work for him. And Nicholas and his buddies Cody and Jesse accepted the offer. Over the course of the summer, they learned a lot about Byron from the stories that he would tell them and just by regularly being in and out of the house. It became obvious that Byron had a lot of nice things, and the boys started taking advantage of Byron's kindness and trust by stealing little things here and there. If it was something that they could sell, they would take it to pawn shops for money to buy alcohol or substances for their weekly parties. It didn't seem like Byron's attempt to keep the boys out of trouble was going very well and working, and even though they'd act nice and appreciative to his face, it's clear that they were just using him to make money, whether it was through working for him and earning the money or not. They started to slack off with the jobs that he asked them to do, and they even damaged some of his expensive lawn equipment, like a tractor, while they were just goofing off with it. But he was paying them good money for not a lot of work, and the guys got to hang out together while making a buck, and then choosing to pocket things when they could for even a bigger profit. When summer ended and the kids went back to school, it didn't seem like their partying slowed down at all. Haile was said to have developed a pretty serious substance issue during this time. However, it wasn't toward any specific type of substance. It was said that she was more so addicted to the feeling of being high and would really use anything and everything that she could get her hands on. The same was true for Nicholas, although to maybe a slightly lesser extent. Even though the partying was definitely becoming an issue, their families still considered them to be good kids. They didn't get into any major trouble with the law other than one shoplifting incident for Haile. They kept on track with school and just seemed like they were doing normal teenage stuff, and that all of the rebelling behavior was just a phase. At least, their parents hoped so. Others, especially retired-aged people, felt more like the teens in Little Falls were running rampant and getting away with all sorts of mischief around the town, and they wished that the police or their parents would rein them in on a tighter leash, so to speak. Toward the end of the school year, Nick and his friends, Cody and Jesse, had been talking about how they couldn't wait to go back and work for Byron Smith again that summer. They were ready to get back to their treasure trove of items to pawn for money, and they really felt like they had pulled the wool over Byron's eyes the summer before. Since Byron never had confronted them about the items that had gone missing, they figured that he was just an old, forgetful old man and someone that they could easily, definitely manipulate. So when the summer of 2012 finally rolled around, the boys showed up to Byron's, expecting to get to work for him on any of the projects that he'd had for them to do. They thought he would be happy to see them again and for the help again, but that didn't turn out to be the case. Without telling them why, Byron simply said he didn't need their help this year and wished them a happy summer and good luck with their future. He wasn't rude or mean about it. He just matter-of-factly told them that he didn't need their help and wished them luck with other summer jobs. It's been said that this was a pretty big blow to the boys' ego, and they were upset that their big plans had been quickly shut down. Regardless, Byron didn't want to make the same mistake he did last year by trusting kids who clearly had no respect, honesty, or boundaries, and it's not like he couldn't do the work himself after all. He had offered them the jobs out of kindness, and it was their own fault for ruining that opportunity for themselves. Byron had purchased another home not too far from his house on Elm Street, and he bought this as an investment and hoped to possibly rent it out. The house still needed some work, and he planned on fixing it up over that summer while doing his normal yard work, fishing, photography, and antiquing. However, one day, when he went over to do some work at the rental house, he walked in to find the entire thing completely destroyed from vandalism. There was spray paint all over the walls, the carpet, and the marble countertops. Cabinets were broken, windows were shattered, and bedroom doors had holes in them. It was a disaster. Byron was mortified and reported the incident to the police immediately, and they said that they would make a report, but that there wasn't much that they could do to find out who did it. Back in 2012, Ring cameras were non-existent, and security cameras at homes were still relatively rare, so it was really a shot in the dark as to which group of rowdy teens did this to the house. However, in the back of Byron's mind, he thought that he might have an idea of who it could be. With little to no evidence of who the culprits were, he really had no other choice but to move on and start again on renovations, and he hoped that whoever had done it got it out of their system and could move on as well. Starting in June of 2012, Byron Smith became the target of relentless pranks of Ding Dong Ditch. At least once a week, between midnight and 2 a.m., his doorbell would ring, but when he would open the door, nobody was there. The more it happened, the more he started to wonder if he was actually going crazy and was dreaming it, or if the doorbell was in fact actually ringing. He decided to change the sound of his doorbell to see if it really was happening, because he wasn't sure. And then the same day he changed it, the bell rang again that night. He knew that someone was trying to get on his nerves, but he really couldn't understand why this was happening, and why this was happening so frequently. He did tell the boys that he didn't need them to work, but in any logical person's mind, that's not really too big of a deal. There were tons of places to work in Little Falls, and he wasn't rude or anything to them. Plus, he technically could have reported the items he knew the group stole, but he didn't. So it didn't really make sense that they'd be holding this grudge, damaging his property, and ding-dong ditching him over and over and over again at all hours of the night, all because he didn't let them come do some yard work. Plus, let's be honest, what 17 or 18-year-old plays ding-dong ditch? Regardless, it was starting to keep Byron up at night, thinking about people being outside of his home and waking him up from the ringing, and he ultimately decided to talk to his neighbor Bill Anderson about what was going on. Bill and Byron threw around the idea of him possibly setting up surveillance cameras, which seemed like a good idea. He worked in security for years and knew how to do it. It was just a matter of getting the supplies. By July, Byron had still not yet finished setting up his security camera system. It seemed like the ding-dong ditching was starting to subside a bit, so he didn't really feel the sense of urgency that he did when everything had first started to escalate. Now, due to Byron's antiquing hobby, he often had large amounts of money that he kept in a dresser drawer in his bedroom. Many antique shops, flea markets, and garage sales don't accept debit cards, so it was pretty normal for him to have cash like this on hand. One day that July, Byron opened his drawer and realized that the money that he had in there was gone. It had vanished. He racked his brain trying to think about if he had spent it or moved it, but the amount was a little over $3,000, and he would have remembered making a purchase that required that much money. He didn't report the cash as stolen because he knew that it was highly unlikely that he would get the money back. Byron was able to get up a security camera and put it up in the front of his house, but he eventually wanted to add a few more around the property to be able to better monitor any potential trespassers. Throughout August and into September, whenever Byron was away from home for any reason, it always seemed like when he returned, there were more and more items missing. His friends and neighbors, Bill Anderson, as well as John and Kathy Lang, had said that during this time, Byron was becoming increasingly agitated and even paranoid about people breaking into his house, and rightfully so. Anyone who has ever had their car or house gone through and stolen from knows how violating and scary that feels. Like I said before, home is where a person should feel safe and feel the most safe, like a haven. When someone has been creeping around your safe place, it takes away the peace of mind and security someone has in their own home. Now, to have it happen multiple times, whether you think you have an idea of who's doing it or not, would start to freak anybody out and would start to mentally wear on anyone. Going into the fall of 2012, John, Kathy, and Bill, the neighbors, said that Byron started to withdraw more and more. He didn't want to leave his house as much because he felt like if he were ever to go anywhere further than just his neighbor's house, someone would surely break in. So he started to compulsively obsess over the locks on his doors, changing them all and adding padlocks wherever he could. He started to put all of his focus into creating the perfect security system that, when installed, would have 4 monitors on a live feed with recording in his shop down in his basement. I am talking high tech. His basement was fully finished with several shelves of books, a comfortable reading chair, a TV, and a fireplace. There was another room that he made his shop to work on various indoor projects, store extra things, and keep stacks of wood dry for the fireplace on several tarps. It was like the perfect retired gentleman's man cave down there. So September rolls around, and the ding-dong ditching started again. Maybe because the thieves were annoyed with Byron upping his security and adding all of the new locks and the cameras. With the ding-dong ditching escalating to almost every single night, Byron was barely sleeping, maybe getting 4 hours a night, if that. Even with the new locks, in September, the thieves were able to somehow gain entry and steal 2 of Byron's guns. Knowing that whoever was doing this was now armed, he quickly went and bought more guns to replace the ones that were stolen. And then he started spiraling further and further into paranoia and fear that the thieves could come back and possibly use his own guns against him. Byron's friends said that his state of mind was going beyond compulsive, and he seemed to be becoming almost neurotic with his home security and protecting himself. In mid-October, even though he didn't really want to leave, Byron had to go out of town. His neighbors were aware of everything that had been going on and were keeping an eye on Elm Street. Even though his security system wasn't fully ready yet, he didn't have a choice but to leave. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he had to go out of town for. It's just been stated that it was something that he couldn't reschedule or put off, but nevertheless, he had to leave. Byron always parked his truck in the driveway, so with it being gone overnight, the thieves knew that they had a chance to rob him yet again. However, this time, the monetary value and, most importantly, the sentimental value of the items that were stolen would completely push Byron over the edge. On October 14th, Byron returned from his short trip to find his back door going into the basement kicked in. Inside, he discovered that over $50,000 worth of property, including treasured heirlooms, were missing. Some of the most heartbreaking items were the prisoner of war Rolex that his father had given him, his mother's gold jewelry, including her ring and necklace, his military ribbons, and his prized Nikon camera. 2 more guns that had been in his family for decades, like his 1952 Remington shotgun and a mini Ruger rifle belonging to his father, were also stolen as well. Other less sentimental items, but still items of value, including a gun scope, gold coins, cash, a less expensive digital camera, 2 iPods, 2 GPS systems, memory cards, an expensive chainsaw, a gas kit, and even a copper wire were also stolen. Byron was completely shattered and broken by this. There would be no way to replace the precious items from his parents that were now gone and probably sold for pennies on the dollar at some pawn shop. Devastated doesn't even begin to describe the level of pain that Byron felt from these losses. He was completely stripped of any safety, security, and dignity that he once felt in his own home, and he finally decided to report the break-in to the police. On the back basement door that was kicked in, he found a shoe print that resembled the type of shoes that teenagers wear for skateboarding. He removed the door panel and took it to the police station to turn in as evidence. He'd already made a report and gave an itemized list of the things that were stolen, but he asked to speak with the sheriff about the investigation and possible suspects that he had in mind. Byron waited at the police station for well over an hour, and when it became apparent that no one was coming to talk to him, he decided to go home to prepare himself and his home for the next inevitable attempted break-in. While at the time it hadn't been proven yet, it was pretty obvious who was responsible for most, if not all, of the burglaries on Byron's home. For Nick, Haile, and their friends, breaking into people's homes and cars had become basically a regular old pastime. Nick's older sister Rachel would even join in from time to time as well. According to their parents, they knew about the partying, but not to the extent of any of them developing a substance abuse problem, and they claimed that they were definitely not aware of their children breaking into houses. However, it shouldn't have been that much of a surprise, because on August 24th, just a couple of months earlier, Nick and Rachel's older sister reported him to the police for allegedly stealing some prescriptions from her home. He was also on the police's radar for some other thefts in the area, but was only just a potential suspect at that time. Regardless, fulfilling their need for the high of drugs, the adrenaline, or both, was starting to become more and more reckless. As we know, teenagers often have a mentality that they're invincible. They don't necessarily consider the implications of their actions or always have the ability to anticipate long-term consequences. However, Haile and Rachel were now over 18 at this point, and all of the boys were old enough to know that stealing is not only wrong, it's a crime. Pocketing a candy bar or some lip gloss is a mistake that a lot of kids make, but burglary of homes goes beyond just a little petty shoplifting. Some even argue that shoplifting is a victimless crime, but infringing on someone's home, especially the same person more than once, is just brazen and cruel. The audacity that someone would have to rob the same person over and over is just mind-blowing to me, and at that point, it's no little mistake. Burglary is a felony and can have some serious consequences. I've heard people say that if you're willing to break into someone's house to steal, say, a TV, that you need to decide if that TV is worth your life, because some people can and will protect their homes with deadly force.
If you break into somebody's home, you better not have an expectation you're going to walk out alive, because the law permits them to shoot you.
It seems like that was a lesson that the teens in Little Falls would eventually have to learn the hard way. Going into November of 2012, Bill Anderson helped Byron install all of the cameras that he had prepared for his security system. There was a camera at the front door, one at the back basement door, and 2 others around the outside of the home. Bill said that Byron seemed to have completely lost it due to the lack of sleep and living in a constant state of fear. He worried that if the burglars came back and he happened to be at the home, then they would probably use the guns that they had stolen from him in the previous burglary. During the last break-in, there were 2 guns in cases under some clothes in his closet that the thieves somehow missed, so he still had those and had purchased another gun as well, just in case. He started carrying a revolver in a holster on his hip at all times, even inside his home. He rearranged his bookshelves in the basement to create a little nook for his reading chair out of view from the windows in case of anybody peeking in. He decided to move all of his vehicles, the car that he inherited when his mom passed, and his motorcycles, all into his garage just to be safe. And his neighbor Bill said that he was constantly watching the surveillance monitors in his shop for any activity on the cameras. With little assistance from the local police, Byron went over and over in his mind what he would do if someone broke in while he was home. He said that in all of the dangerous places he lived in his entire career, he'd never had anything stolen from him. And it seems like he felt more at war in his own home than he ever did while he was in the military. On November 22nd, 2012, Thanksgiving Day, Haile and Nick were driving around together, scouting out places that they could potentially break into. Haile got a text from Nick's sister Rachel that said, "Hey, it's Rachel. My phone's dead. I miss you." Haile replied, "OMG, I have so much to tell you. Me and Nick are a team right now." Rachel said, "I can't wait to hear it all, and nice. What are you guys doing?" Haile replied, "Driving around, went back there from last night, LOL." Then they spoke about a place that Haile and Nick supposedly robbed and some of the stuff that they stole, including some pretty disgusting items. Not really sure why anyone would want to take those things that someone else has used, but whatever. So Rachel says, "That's so effed up, I love it." Then Haile said, "I wish you were with. We're doing it tonight if you wanna." Rachel replied, "I wish I was too. And well, yeah, I think I'm just gonna tell him I'm spending the night with family or what, ? I think she was maybe talking about her dad there, though I'm not sure. So Haile responds and says, "Yeah." And then Rachel replies and says, "I hope tonight is fun and works out." The family was already supposed to be getting together for Thanksgiving, so it seems that Haile and Nick had started their little cousinly Bonnie and Clyde robberies earlier that morning and would then have Thanksgiving dinner like a normal family, then continue their spree later that night with Rachel. The way Rachel and Haile spoke about it, like it was some sort of fun and exciting game, just shows how they clearly didn't understand the effects of their actions and the effects that their actions had on others, or maybe they just didn't care. At around 11 a.m. that morning, Byron was over at Bill Anderson's house, chatting with him before Bill left to go visit his family for Thanksgiving. Out the window, they could see a car driving slowly by Byron's house, and Byron said that he needed to go prepare. He walked back home and made sure that all of his cameras were on, just in case. And he also decided to unscrew the light bulbs in his basement because he was paranoid that the thieves could look in and see him if he was down there. He had also bought some voice recording devices to put around the house to capture any potential sounds while he was gone, and he made sure that those were handy as well. After he checked that the cameras were all working, he decided to go start cleaning up in his garage, which he'd been meaning to do before it got too cold outside in the winter. He wanted to move his truck out of the way because he was planning to take things in and out of the garage and onto the driveway to rearrange and clean stuff out. He decided to move his truck and park it on the next street over in front of the house where he knew a cop lived and who had a patrol car in the driveway, thinking that it would be safe there. He felt like his truck would be safer there than on his street, which was clearly being targeted. He walked back home and did a little more work before going inside. The recent loss from the theft and seeing someone driving by his house yet again was increasingly wearing on Byron mentally. He didn't even feel safe cleaning out his garage, and he decided to just sit in his chair down in the basement to try to read and take his mind off things. However, he still had this horrible feeling about the car that had driven by, and he decided to turn on one of his voice recorders next to him on a bookshelf. He tried to read his book, but he was so anxious that he could barely even concentrate or comprehend what he was reading. He started thinking out loud about things he might do or say if something were to happen, and it sounded like the paranoid mumblings of someone who had completely lost it. At around 12:30, Byron heard what sounded like jingling of his front door handle. A few moments later, one of the security cameras picked up motion outside near his basement patio. Byron could see that a man covering their face with a hood was walking around behind his house and trying to peek inside the windows. He started to feel a surge of fear and adrenaline, and he sat in his chair quietly hoping that the person would leave, but knowing that they probably weren't going to. The tape recorder was going, and the cameras were capturing the potential intruder. So he knew that he'd at least have proof of whatever was going to happen and who was responsible for this. We have the audio that the tape recorder captured, and we can actually hear what Byron was experiencing. He only had one working phone at the time, and it was upstairs in the kitchen. So he prepared himself for whatever was going to happen, with a shotgun propped up on the bookshelf next to him, and that revolver strapped to his hip. He waited and listened, and a few moments later he could hear the man outside trying to disable or destroy Byron's security camera that was situated on the basement patio. This made him extremely nervous and afraid because that meant that the person who wanted in was going to extra lengths to make sure that no one could find out who they were. It made Byron feel like he was in even more danger, and he assumed that the person was probably armed underneath the hoodie that they were wearing. Next, a woman holding a bright-colored purse with a hoodie cinched tightly around her face could be seen circling the house, determined to find a way inside. Not long after that, whoever it was stalking around outside found a metal pipe. Byron heard glass shattering upstairs, and it sounded like it was coming from his bedroom window. Byron grabbed his shotgun and felt like a sitting duck just waiting, not knowing how many people were going to come in through that window, and with what potential guns and weapons they had on them. What more could they possibly take from him that they hadn't already? In his state of almost delirium due to being constantly targeted and terrorized, he felt like since they had already stolen so much, that they could possibly be there just to kill him and take his life. Now, just a warning that the audio from the break-in could be disturbing to some listeners. Byron listened and could hear footsteps above him, coming closer to the basement door, and he grabbed his shotgun to prepare to defend himself and his home once and for all. His heart started to practically beat out of his chest as he heard the footsteps start to slowly make their way downstairs. As soon as the intruder's legs and hips came into view on the steps, he fired his gun toward them, striking the burglar and causing them to tumble down the stairs. Byron fired a few more shots until he knew there was no way that the intruder could hurt him. Byron said out loud, "You're dead," as if to solidify to himself that the threat was over, for now.
You're dead.
Byron's military instincts immediately had kicked in and started to take over, and he knew he needed to get the intruder out of the way in case anyone else was coming. Blood was starting to get on his carpet, so he quickly grabbed a tarp that was covering that firewood in his shop and slid the dead intruder onto it so that he could drag them away from the basement stairs and into the shop. He wanted the person out of his sight, but also knew that seeing their dead friend and partner would only enrage any other intruders coming in behind him. So once he got him out of the way, he went and sat back down in his reading chair to reload his gun and try to take a moment to process what just happened. Just when he felt like he might be able to breathe, 10 minutes later, Byron started to hear the jingling of the front door handle again. It seemed like the person was confused as to why their accomplice hadn't unlocked the door for them after breaking in. Maybe they didn't hear the gunshots. Moments later, he heard slow footsteps coming from above, and he knew they must have entered through that broken window. Byron remembered seeing the person with a large purse and thought to himself that they probably had a weapon in there. He heard someone softly calling Nick's name, and as each step grew closer and closer to the basement door, Byron was filled with more fear and more rage at these people for putting him in this situation. As the second intruder started making their way down the stairs, Byron again aimed his gun toward the steps and fired as soon as he saw the person's legs. After the first shot, the intruder tumbled down the stairs, just like Nick did, and Byron got up to shoot the person again who was clearly still alive.
Oh, sorry about that. You're dying.
Byron attempted to pull the trigger for a second time, but his gun jammed. To his recollection, the woman's clothes were all tangled, and she still had her purse, so he felt a sense of urgency to shoot her again before she was able to pull a weapon out from somewhere, possibly the purse. In his rage, he said, "Oh, sorry about that," and the wounded woman on the ground could be heard saying, "Oh my God," before Byron drew his revolver from the holster on his hip and shot her 4 more times. She was screaming while he shot her. And after the 4th shot, he said, "You're dying." And when she stopped screaming, he called her a bitch.
Oh, sorry about that. You're dying.
Byron dragged the woman onto the tarp next to the first intruder, and he said that he started to hear her struggling to breathe. He would later go on to say that even if he hates someone, he doesn't believe that they should suffer, and he made the choice to shoot her at point-blank range under the chin in what he called a clean finishing shot. Byron was in a complete state of shock, delirium, and adrenaline. He sat back down in his chair, shaking and breathing heavily while trying to calm down, and also felt some sense of relief and safety now at this point, trying to reconcile all of the emotions he's feeling. At this point, he wasn't sure if any other accomplices would be making their way into his house looking for their friends, and he was just as on edge, not knowing what else was going to happen. As he sat, he started talking to himself, which was also captured on the recorder. Some of it was just paranoid mumbling, and some of it sounded almost like he was rehearsing what he would have to say to the police or to a lawyer to explain everything that had gone on. As time went on and it seemed less likely that he was in any more immediate danger, his mumblings became more and more incoherent, and it was obvious that this entire situation had caused Byron to snap, even though he stated that he did feel some sense of relief in that moment.
Cute. I'm sure she thought she was a real pro. No rush, but, when it's convenient for you. Check out the waffle apron. Check out the jacket trim. I feel a little bit safer. Not totally safe. I'm still shaking a bit, but a little bit safer. No rush, but, as convenient for you. I left my house at 11:30. They were both dead by 1. I refuse to live in fear. I felt like I was cleaning up a mess. Worse than spilled food. Worse than vomit. Worse than shit. Cleaning up a mess. You're dead. In some tiny little respect. I was doing my civic duty. Because the law enforcement system couldn't handle it, and I had to do it. I had to do it. They weren't human. I don't see them as human. I see them as vermin. Social mistakes, social problems. I don't see them as human. I see them as social defense. This bitch was going to go through her life spoiling things for other people. Thieving, robbing, drug use. The gravel driveway is blocked. You have to go north to the next one north of that. Then park 100 yards north of the corner and walk in from the west. Until somebody shoots you. It's all fun, cool, exciting, and highly profitable until somebody kills you. It's a sucker shot. People going down strange stairs naturally watch the steps. Like I give a damn who she is. Sorry. So much regret. I try to be a good person. I try to do what I should, be friendly to other people, help them when I can. And because I try to be a decent person, they think I'm a patsy. I'm a sucker. They think I'm there for them to take advantage of. Is that the reward for being a good person? $5,000 slice, $10,000 slice. And if I gather enough evidence, they might be prosecuted. If they're prosecuted, it might go to court. If it goes to court, they might be found guilty. If they're found guilty, they might spend 6 months, 2 years in jail. And then they're out, and they need money worse than ever, and they're filled with revenge. I cannot live a life like that. I cannot have that chewing on me for the rest of my life. I cannot. I refuse to live with that level of fear in my life. I refuse to live with that level of fear in my life.
Once his heart rate started to come down and he was no longer in his heightened state of panic, he started to think about what he should do next. He went back and forth on whether or not to call the police because in his illogical state of mind, he felt like it would be an awful thing to ruin someone else's holiday by having to deal with all of this. Obviously, that wasn't the best choice, but apparently it's how he felt at the time, and he clearly wasn't thinking rationally. He figured there was no reason why the call couldn't wait until the morning, when he was fully calmed down and was able to articulate what had happened. Plus, the intruders were undeniably dead, so in his opinion, there was no reason to rush an ambulance to the scene. Byron sat in his chair for several hours, but before going upstairs, he noticed that the gun blast had sent the male intruder right out of his shoes, and they were laying scattered near the bottom of the stairs. He went and got the door panel with the shoe print from the break-in from a month before, and the shoes that the burglar was wearing matched that print perfectly. This solidified to Byron that he had caught the previous burglar. He went upstairs and, not surprisingly, was unable to sleep, and he started to feel just as paranoid as before, that the intruder's family would come looking for them, or more of their accomplices would break in to see what had happened and where their friends were and what was going on.
Mother and father are semi-psychotic, are both semi-psychotic.
That night, the Brady and Kifer family waited hours for Haile and Nick to show up for Thanksgiving dinner. As it got later in the evening, they decided to go ahead and eat and figured that they had just lost track of time with some friends or their phones were dead. Rachel and the kids' parents called their phones over and over again, but nobody answered. Rachel knew in the back of her mind what their plan was and what Haile told her that she and Nick were planning to do, but she didn't think that they would just ditch her like that, and she became even more worried that something had gone wrong. She didn't necessarily assume that a burglary had gone wrong, but she and her mom started to wonder if they possibly got into a car accident. Nicholas wasn't too experienced driving, and the roads were said to be icy that night in Minnesota. After dinner, Rachel and her mom drove all around town to see if they could spot Nick's red Mitsubishi parked somewhere or on the side of the road. They actually had gotten word from someone that there had been an accident involving a red car, and they raced to the scene to see if it was Nick. To their relief, it wasn't Nick's car, but this actually made Rachel even more nervous, not having any idea where her brother and her cousin were. In the morning, Byron decided to call Bill Anderson. He told Bill that he had blown the top off their break-in problem and wanted to know if Bill could find him the number for an attorney. Bill knew many more people in Little Falls than Byron did, and he figured that Bill would know who to call or at least be able to find someone who could help him. Some people assume that immediately asking for an attorney is something a guilty person would do, but it's never a bad idea to get an attorney when you have to talk to the police, especially in situations as serious as this one. Bill wasn't able to find any law offices open due to it being Black Friday right after Thanksgiving. When Bill called him back, Byron didn't tell him specifically what he meant by his earlier statement, but Bill knew by the sound of his voice that something was horribly wrong. He decided to call the police to tell them that Byron needed assistance with his frequent burglary problem, and they said that they would make their way over to his house over on Elm Street.
Is he there?
No, he's not in today.
Oh, he's not in today.
No. Is there something I can help you with?
Well, we got a serious problem out here in the Riverwood area.
Okay. What kind of problem are we talking?
Well, yeah, that break-in situation we've been having on Elm Street.
Bill told Byron that the police were headed over, and when they arrived at his house, Byron exited his house with his hands above his head and told them that he wasn't holding any firearms. And the police recall that being kind of odd, but Byron has a great respect for authority and law enforcement, and just wanted them to know that he was unarmed at the time so that they could feel safe approaching him and his house. Byron seemed normal, and when they entered his home, he calmly walked them through what happened. By the way that Byron was explaining the situation, the officer could have had no idea what he would come across in the basement just a few moments later. His tone seemed more like someone who had been burglarized and that the perpetrators fled, rather than them actually being dead in his basement wrapped in a tarp. When they got into the basement, the officer noticed bloodstains on the wall and the carpet. When he was led into the shop where Byron put the bodies, after pulling the tarp away, the officer recognized who they were: cousins Nicholas Brady and Haile Kifer. During this time, Nick's mom, Kim, and his sister, Rachel, had gone to the police station to report the kids as missing.
Did you have a mother's intuition?
I knew something was wrong. It was just so unlike Nicholas.
By Friday afternoon, the family was frantic.
So you decided to call the police?
We went
in
to the sheriff's
brought pictures
department
right away.
and filled out missing persons reports for both of them.
Later that day, after the sheriff had been to Byron's house, an officer and a chaplain were sent to the homes of Nicholas and Haile to break the news to their families that they were now deceased. Kim Brady said that as soon as she saw the police car pulling into her driveway, she knew that something was terribly wrong. When they came inside, the chaplain looked at Kim and said, "Your son is dead." Rachel walked in soon after the police arrived, and the family was even more devastated when they learned that Haile and Nick had been shot, and that it had been during an attempted burglary. Even though Rachel was well aware of what Haile and Nick had been getting into, their family said that never in their wildest dreams could they have imagined that they would have been in a situation like that.
Found out that Byron Smith had waited 24 hours.
My mind was then, why, if he was so scared, wouldn't you be on the phone? I mean, because those kids had families too that were waiting.
And then for him to say he didn't want to bother anybody on Thanksgiving, really.
It became clearer and clearer and clearer that there were some things that were strange about this case.
After the discovery of Nick and Haley's bodies in Byron's basement, he had to be arrested and brought in for questioning to get to the bottom of exactly what took place. Byron waived his right to have an attorney present for this. I guess after he had time to think about it, he figured that this was clearly a case of home self-defense and didn't feel like an attorney was necessary at the time. Byron minced absolutely no words regarding what happened, and he started from the beginning, all the way back to when things first started going missing, the ding-dong ditching, and the escalating burglaries that happened over the course of the year. It was estimated that Byron's house had been broken into more than 12 times, and during this police investigation, they discovered that Byron's garage had also been broken into, which he wasn't even aware of at the time. At first, to police, this seemed like a case that would fall under Minnesota's Castle Doctrine law, which states that a homeowner or resident can use deadly force if they believe that their life is in danger, or to stop a felony from taking place at their home by using reasonable means to stop the threat. The resident also has the obligation to render aid and call 911 after a defensive action. So the more that Byron spoke about what happened, the more they started to think that this case wasn't as cut and dry as they originally thought, especially when Byron very matter-of-factly stated that he put Haile out of her misery, basically execution style, and admitted to firing more shots than was probably needed. He was asked whether or not he was aware that the teens were armed, and he said he didn't stop to ask them, and didn't check afterward either. However, at the time, he said he had reason to believe that his life was in danger, and felt that he had no choice but to shoot or be shot.
I was in the basement, in my favorite reading chair, reading a paperback, and I see a shadow go past the picture window. Then somebody's rattling the basement door trying to get in. But it also is locked and unbolted. In the past couple of weeks, I've gotten into the habit of carrying my guns with me inside my house because I don't know who's going to break in when. So I'm sitting there and I hear the steps come down the hallway, turn around and come down the stairs. And I decide that I've got a choice of either shooting or being shot.
When investigators were going over the crime scene and found Byron's tape recorder, they felt like his recordings made this case far more sinister and possibly even premeditated. The investigators and county prosecutor believed that Byron parked his truck away from his home that day because he knew that his truck being out of the driveway would lead the kids to think that he wasn't home, that this wasn't done as a safety precaution, that it was done to lure them to the home. They firmly believed that this was a way for Byron to lure these teens to his house, who he knew would try to rob him if they thought that he was gone. They said he then sat in waiting, knowing that the kids would show up eventually, and he had a tarp set out for after he shot the kids. They claimed that the things that Byron said on the tape were taunting the kids as he shot them, and Byron could have just shot them once or twice, but didn't have to intentionally kill them. They also said that shooting Haile under the chin when he discovered that she was still breathing was an act of execution, and what he did went far beyond home defense. They thought him waiting to call until the next day and Bill being the one to actually call 911 shows that Byron was in no rush to get police to his house to report the break-in or the death of these teens. When the initial shock and grief started to subside, Nick and Haile's parents understood that their children were in the midst of a crime when they were shot, and they empathized with Byron about feeling the need to protect his home during an invasion. That was until they heard the tape recordings. The police and the family said they were just kids having fun, not trying to cause trouble. Which, I'm sorry, but that statement is beyond untrue, and what they did went far past two kids getting into a little bit of trouble here. During their investigation, police brought Nick's red Mitsubishi into the crime lab for analysis, and they discovered that it was packed full of stolen items from previous burglaries. They also found stolen medication, including prescriptions from Bill Anderson when they burglarized his home earlier in the day while he was at his family's Thanksgiving. The medication they stole wasn't even a narcotic or something that you could get high off of. It was medicine for his diabetes. That just shows the lack of concern or care for anyone else, that they would be willing to steal an elderly man's medication that he needs to live just to make a quick buck. If anyone has ever lost or had medication stolen, you'd know just how difficult it is to get a new prescription from your doctor at the drop of a hat, especially if it does happen to be a controlled substance. Doctors are very hesitant to believe that a medication is lost or stolen because drug-seeking patients could use that as an excuse to get more pills. A person typically has to file a police report and prove that their medication was stolen in order to get a new prescription early. And no one should have to jump through those hoops just because some punk kids have no regard for anyone but themselves. During Byron's final interrogation with police, he was asked to explain why he decided to move his truck to another street. And he explained about wanting to clean out his garage and get the truck out of the way. When he was going through this with police, he came to a sudden realization that the kids must have thought that he wasn't home because his truck wasn't in the driveway. It appeared to only then have dawned on him that his truck not being there was the reason they'd break in during the day while he was home.
That would have been the trigger for them coming to see me. That would have been the trigger. That's why they came. They thought I had gone away.
Okay.
They saw me drive the truck out and they didn't see me come back because I walked back. And that's why they came.
However, the police believed that this was all a part of his plan, and just days later, Byron was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, which quickly changed to first-degree murder after the prosecution decided that they had enough evidence to prove that there was premeditation. Byron's bail was set to $50,000, which he posted. While preparing for trial, the judge told Byron's defense attorney that they couldn't tell the jury about the kids' previous criminal activities, and that it was inadmissible due to Byron not being aware of who they were when he shot them. They weren't allowed to present the months and months of burglaries and missing items because the judge said that there wasn't any concrete proof that Haile and Nick had been the ones to burglarize him before. Without this information being allowed into the trial, the defense did their best with what they could to explain to the jury that Byron was in a true fear for his life. During the trial, the camera that was stolen from Byron's home was discovered to have been sitting in the Little Falls Police Department evidence room for 2 years. Apparently, after Byron reported it as missing, a confidential informant called the police station and told them that the camera would be at a local boat dock. The police officer went and got it and stuck it in the evidence room, rather than giving it back to Byron or trying to go through the more than 100 new pictures that had been taken on it to try to figure out who had stolen it. Also, later some text messages were found on Nick's phone between him and his friend Cody, who had worked with him at Byron's back in 2011. The conversation started with Cody asking, "Where you been?" Nick replied, "What do you mean? You didn't text me back?" Cody said, "I know, I'm sorry. Byron's possibly indicating that he wanted him and Nick to go and rob Byron." Nick replied, "When?" And Cody said, "Soon." Nick responded, "Yeah, we keep saying that and not doing it." And Cody replied, "Well, let's do it." And the two planned on the following day to do this. If this could have been shown to the jury, they would have been able to see that Byron was being victimized by this group of kids. They also didn't see the texts of the morning of the burglary between Rachel and Haile that explicitly stated that they had been out robbing other houses and that this wasn't some one-time mistake out of their character. Byron's attorney also discovered that previous reports Byron made to the deputy had incorrect theft dates, and that the theft of his guns was never followed up on, completely disregarding the magnitude of teenagers being in possession of stolen firearms. The deputy reportedly told Byron to put up cameras at his home to gather more evidence, meaning he told him to anticipate being robbed again so that he would have proof on camera of who did it. However, none of this was able to be presented in the trial either. This left Byron feeling abandoned by his local law enforcement, and he felt like he was being victimized yet again and portrayed as a monster who was just out for vengeance and chomping at the bit to kill some kids. The jury wasn't able to consider how being burglarized numerous times must have affected his mental health and his feeling of safety in his own home. While many people in Little Falls believed that Byron took things too far and lured the kids to his house on purpose, there were just as many people on his side that felt like he had the right to defend his home by any means necessary. They felt like you can't lure someone or trick them into breaking into your home. Regardless if you think someone is home or not, you still don't have a right to break into anyone's house. They also felt like Byron had a right to move his truck wherever he wanted to, and even if he did want people to think he wasn't home, that was also his prerogative. I know people who hide when they hear the doorbell ring and pretend they aren't home so that they don't have to talk to anyone. It's not a crime to try to pretend that you aren't home. The lead detective on the case said something along the lines that everyone makes mistakes when they're young, but they don't die for those mistakes. Others would argue that Haile, Nick, and their group of friends' actions shouldn't be trivialized as an average mistake, and that the relentless taunting and even torture that they put Byron through ruined his life.
I believe they did not. I think it was an execution of two kids that did not pose a threat to him at any time.
His supporters said that he spent years serving his country and should have been able to live in peace without having some vengeful and selfish kids unravel his entire sense of security and pride. The prosecution did their best to play the most damning portions of Byron's tape recordings, and one juror said in a later interview that the recordings were what sealed the deal for them, that he was a deranged and dangerous murderer. They really painted a picture that somehow Byron made the kids break into his house just so he could shoot and kill two unarmed teens for retribution. During Haile's autopsy, it was discovered that she had high amounts of a drug called DXM in her system, which is a drug commonly found in cough syrup. Some people consume large quantities of cough syrup to feel high, and it's one reason that you have to be 18 to purchase certain cough medications now. The medical examiner testified that the amount of DXM in her system was enough to cause inebriation, and the prosecution said that this could have skewed her judgment the day of the burglary. They said that by Byron calling the kids vermin and saying that having to deal with what they did was worse than cleaning up all sorts of disgusting things, proved his hatred rather than his fear, and that is what made him shoot the teens. They felt like he mocked Haile and Nick after he shot them, and continued to shoot them past the point where they posed a threat to his safety, which goes beyond the statutes of the Castle Doctrine. His statement that at the time he felt like he was doing his civic duty didn't sit well with the jury either. On April 29, 2014, Byron was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder after only 3 hours of jury deliberation, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
A Morrison County jury's found a Little Falls man guilty of premeditated murder in the killings of 2 teens who broke into his home. The jury deliberated for about 3 hours before finding 65-year-old Byron Smith guilty on both counts of first-degree premeditated murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder.
It's not a fair or just verdict, but it's the verdict the jury heard with the evidence they saw. They didn't see all the evidence, and he is adamant about an appeal. And he has every right to that appeal because there's a lot of things the jury did not see.
Judge Douglas Anderson then sentenced Smith to prison without the possibility of parole. Smith was charged with killing 18-year-old Haile Kifer and 17-year-old Nick Brady after the teens broke into his Little Falls home on Thanksgiving Day 2012. Smith had claimed he was simply defending himself. Defense lawyer Stephen Meshbesher said Smith was fearful after previous break-ins at his home, but prosecutors argued Smith lured the teens in and waited in his basement to kill them. Minnesota law allows a person to use deadly force for defense, but that action must be considered reasonable.
This isn't a case about whether you have the right to protect yourself in your home. You very clearly do. That's a given. Rather, this was a case about where the limits are before and after a threat to you or your home occurred.
Meshbesher says they plan to appeal Smith's case to the Supreme Court. Ashley Gardes, WJON News.
He was also ordered to pay the family restitution to cover the funeral costs of both Nicholas and Haile. The trial and conviction struck a huge debate in the Little Falls community, as well as the country, after several shows released episodes covering Nick Brady and Haile Kifer's story. Along with interviews from the kids' devastated families, Byron's friends spoke out as well and stated that Byron they knew was a good person. They said that what he endured at the hands of these kids changed him completely, and if they were in his shoes, they would have done the same thing. In March of 2016, Byron filed an appeal to the Minnesota Supreme Court, but the court upheld his conviction and sentence. In November of 2018, Byron's attorney filed a federal appeal, citing several issues with his original trial. They said it was discovered that there were members of the jury that consisted of friends and family of the Kifer and Brady families, as well as the funeral director that conducted each of their funerals. Talk about a conflict of interest. They also stated that the prosecution altered the audio from the tape recorder found at Byron's home. According to the appeal, the audio sequence was rearranged to make it seem like Byron had planned to rehearse speaking to a lawyer before the incident had even occurred. They argued that the jury should have been played the original audio to get the full context, but that the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension has refused to reproduce the original tape recordings. It was also stated that before the trial, a grand jury asked Agent Chad Mucius with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension if there were any text messages between Nick or Haile mentioning Byron and his home. The agent replied, and I quote, "We don't have any information on text messages that would indicate anything regarding the Smith residence at all." The text between Haile and Rachel and Nick and Cody showed substantial forethought regarding burglaries at Byron's home. It was specifically requested that those type of messages be presented for consideration by the grand jury to try Byron for murder, and it wasn't. His attorneys requested that Byron's conviction be set aside and he be given a new trial. But the Federal District Court and the United States Court of Appeals affirmed the decision to deny the appeal.
A Little Falls man convicted of killing two teenagers who broke into his home on Thanksgiving Day 2012 won't be getting a new trial. The Minnesota Supreme Court on Wednesday upheld the 2014 conviction of Byron Smith. A jury convicted the 67-year-old of first-degree premeditated murder in the fatal shootings of 18-year-old Haile Kifer and her 17-year-old cousin Nick Brady. Smith was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Smith's attorney argued he did not get a fair trial. Among other things, attorney Stephen Meshbesher said the courtroom was improperly closed to the public on the trial's opening day. The justices say the alleged errors did not deprive Smith of a fair trial.
If you've enjoyed this segment of Lakeland News, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution to Lakeland Public Television.
On November 20th, 2020, Byron's attorneys filed a petition for certiorari in the United States Supreme Court, which is a court process that seeks judicial review of a decision made by a lower court. This, too, was denied on March 22, 2021. Some other information that has just been released on the Justice for Byron Smith website states that Rachel Brady, Nick's older sister, pawned $600 worth of stolen gold jewelry to a local pawn shop, which is a felony in the state of Minnesota. Byron, who had been routinely checking at local pawn shops for his stolen items, found several pieces of gold, including his mother's jewelry, that were stolen at the pawn shop where Rachel pawned the items. Byron didn't feel like he should have to buy the items back himself, but the police never made an attempt to recover his stolen items or charge Rachel with the felony of pawning stolen property. The attorneys have also gathered records of Byron asking the police for help by writing reports, requesting that they come to his home to view evidence he collected, and the police refusing to speak with him at the station and not accurately documenting reports of the burglaries that Byron did decide to call about. He realized after a while that the police weren't going to be of any help to him, and it even appears that after he was arrested, the police even stole from Byron as well. On Thanksgiving, Byron had put a 20-pound frozen turkey in a container of ice water to thaw. After he was arrested, he called Bill Anderson on Saturday and told him to get the turkey, which if you've ever thawed a completely frozen turkey, you know that it can take days to completely thaw. He told Bill to give it to John and Kathy laying down the street. But when Bill went into his house to get the turkey, the container was still there, where Byron said it would be, but it was completely empty. And the only people who had access to Byron's home on Friday and Saturday were law enforcement. So, obviously, an officer got a free 20-pound turkey that day, which obviously that's just a weird thing to steal, but I get it. It was the holiday. Maybe they needed a turkey. And a turkey might seem like a kind of petty thing to dwell on, but if an officer would take something like that didn't belong to them from Byron's home, it kind of indicates that they might not take theft, petty or not, too seriously.
And the prosecution portrays Nick, 17, and Haile, 18, as about as threatening as deer.
Were Nick and Haile involved in previous burglaries? Did they have a record?
I think they were on the radar a couple other minor possible break-ins and that, and just a little mischievous stuff, but nothing that was serious.
In addition, after listening to Byron's interrogation, the attorneys noticed how the detectives questioned him several times about whether or not he had seen something on the boy's waist, or noticed anything in the girl's boot. They asked these same questions repeatedly, in different ways, and after he would answer, the detectives could be heard outside speaking to another detective in a hushed voice. So is it possible that Nick and Haile really were armed, possibly with a knife or even a gun, in their boot and on their waist? Their case probably wouldn't hold up if the two of them were in fact carrying some type of weapon, which would negate their unarmed kids making a mistake approach that they had. Some of Nick's friends even talked about a whole collection of weapons that he kept in his room. But after the incident, his mother Kim refused to let police search Nick's bedroom. The police didn't secure his room after the shooting, and it's reported that at least one individual removed items from his room that Friday night. Like I said in another recent case, in our country, everyone has the right to a fair trial. For that to happen, all of the information needs to be presented so that the jury can base their opinion on all of the facts, not just one side of the facts or whatever facts support the prosecution's case. It's obvious that Byron, in my opinion, did not get a fair trial, and many people believe that there were missteps and information that shouldn't have been withheld. What do you guys think about this case? I do agree that Byron did go too far after he shot them a couple of times, and he should have just incapacitated them and then called the police. However, these people terrorized Byron for more than a year. They drove him absolutely crazy in his own home, and they stole priceless family heirlooms that could never be replaced. It's not hard to understand his mindset at the time, and I really do believe that he was genuinely afraid that he could be killed with his own guns. This was a retired older man who wanted to live a private, peaceful, quiet life, and he tried his best to give back to the community and give Nick's friends the opportunity to make money by working for him. They took advantage of his kindness, and in my opinion, the items they stole that belonged to Byron's parents is absolutely unforgivable. This case has sparked several conversations online, and there are some who believe that Byron should be punished for taking the shootings too far beyond a reasonable point of self-defense, but he shouldn't necessarily have been given life in prison. If the jury were able to hear the reasoning for his mindset and everything that took place leading up to the shooting, I think it might have had an effect on their decision, or at the very least, his sentencing. Byron's friends believe that his conviction and sentence set a precedent that people can get away with burglary, because now residents may be too afraid to defend themselves in their own homes.
There's a new coalition in Little Falls rallying for justice for Byron Smith and other people who defend their homes according to the Castle Doctrine. As we reported, Smith was convicted of 4 counts of murder after killing 2 teenagers who broke into his house on Thanksgiving 2 years ago. And as our Scott Sheehan tells us, some members joined the group, fear what would happen to them if someone breaks into their home.
They call themselves Citizens for Justice for Byron Smith Coalition. They're a group in Little Falls of people ranging from friends of Smith to those who've never met him and fear what Smith's trial could mean for the Castle Doctrine, which allows you to shoot and kill anyone who endangers you in your home. The coalition's founder, Beverly Newis, says she decided to do something after learning Smith had to pay for the funerals of the teens he killed after they broke into his home.
That wasn't agreeable with me at all. Something had to be done. So I said, I'm going to do something if I can. So I decided that I would put the ad in the paper, and if anybody else agrees with me, let them call me. And I had the calls.
The coalition spokesman Richard Smith, no relation to Byron Smith, says he got involved because he didn't think the proper authorities investigating the prior break-ins took the case seriously.
Had other things been done, there would not be a man in jail and 2 dead kids from this case. In any other case, when you have $60-some thousand stolen and gold and guns, I think it should be taken a little more serious.
While the group formed to support Smith, there are others that came because they fear what would happen to them if they defend their home.
Since the Zabzilka murders in Long Prairie, I would defend myself before I would ask questions. And I'm frightened because if I were to shoot somebody who came in, if they were twitching or moving, I would likely shoot again and shoot again. I could very easily be Byron Smith.
The coalition says they won't just focus on Byron Smith's case, but other cases that they think the home defender was unjustly punished. Scott Sheehan, Lakeland News.
There are people who say if someone is coming into my home, I'm killing them, period. Is that premeditation? It doesn't seem plausible for someone who is already living in fear, or someone like a mother living alone with her kids, to stop and check if someone is armed before shooting an intruder, or ask the intruder how old they are before potentially killing a teenager in their home. At the same time, others are completely against what he did and really think he did trick them into breaking into his home and that he planned to viciously kill them. They think he acted as judge, jury, and executioner, and that he needed to be held responsible to the fullest extent. Now, I personally don't really buy that you can lure someone to break in and rob your home, but I don't know, possibly. What do you think? He had put every type of lock, padlock, a security system, and even strengthened door frames in place to keep people out. How does that sound like someone who wants to be broken into? To me, it sounds like someone who was at their complete wit's end and felt like at the moment they had no other choice. Should he be in jail for the overkill? Yes. Should he spend the rest of his life in prison for first-degree premeditated murder? I'm not so sure, but I would like to know what you guys think. Would you have done the same thing Byron did, or do you think that he was just a crazy madman out for blood? It's been said that the horror movie Don't Breathe, which is about some kids breaking into a man's home and turning it out to be a house of horrors with a deranged killer, was loosely based on this case. But I don't really see any of the correlation with the movie and the villain in this story and Byron Smith, personally. By all accounts, Byron was a good person who was pushed too far by some immature, selfish, delinquent kids. He didn't get the opportunity to enjoy the rest of his retirement, and now he probably never will, unless his attorneys can file yet another appeal and somehow win, which at this point honestly feels unlikely. The whole situation is just sad, and at the end of the day, 2 kids who had their whole lives ahead of them are dead because of their choice to enter someone else's home that day. I think the lesson here is that no amount of money, drugs, or items are ever worth your life. If you want to break into someone's house, then you need to accept the consequences that will come from that, and accept the deadly risk of a homeowner with a gun who is ready to defend their home. How would you have reacted to this case, guys, and what do you think about Byron's sentencing? Is it just, or is it not? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I know this was a long one, guys, so I appreciate you hanging with me for such a long time, and thanks for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please make sure to do so. It takes 1 second. You just hit that subscribe button. It's totally free. It just will make sure that if I post any new videos in the future, when you log into your YouTube account, you'll see them pop up on your screen, and that I will, be in your algorithm, so to speak. And as always, I am always posting frequent case updates over on my Instagram @_AnnieElise. So make sure you're following along there if you have Instagram, so that you're always up to date on current cases and new cases that I talk about. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and until the next one, stay safe.